Welcome everyone. I want to thank you all for taking the time to be here, and also I do want to give a shout out to the organizers, the volunteers that put this conference together. Sometimes their time goes unnoticed, but I want to make sure that I send a thanks to everybody to make this a part of it. So I want to welcome you all to my talk. It's going to be called Powering Up Linux, Unleash PowerShell for Penetration Testing and Red Team Operations. So for some of you guys that do not know me, my name is TJ Null. I've been a hacker and mostly been working in the pen testing and aerospace and defense sector for about several years. I used to work for a company called Cybersecurity. I used to help build out Kali Linux, so many of you pen testers probably use that for time to time. So any tools, any packages, content writing, I was pretty much the guy who did a lot of that back then. Before that, I also worked as a SOC analyst, and I'll talk a little bit more about my story about how I got into this stuff. But outside of InfoSec, because we always got to have something to do outside of work, right? I like to play lacrosse, I like to go hike, and also watch sports, so go Bills. So this is going to be the agenda for the talk, right? I'm going to break some things down for you guys. I'm going to get you guys some cool things about why to use PowerShell for Linux in a day-to-day operation, and also talk about some of the things that I found. And also, we're going to do a bit of a demo. Well, I had some things for the demo that didn't work as planned, but I will be releasing a tool today for any of you guys that want to use this in your operations that you have. And then after that, I'll save some time for any questions, any answers, or just any chit-chat, just for fun. So getting started here real quick, by a show of hands, how many of you know what PowerShell is? I would hope that most of you do, because otherwise I would have to talk about how or what the purpose of PowerShell is. I don't really want to do that. I think the slide really kind of covers it itself. But PowerShell is awesome. All right. I mean, for us as pen testers and as red teamers, we love to use it in our day-to-day job. Does it get to a point where it gets excessively tiring? Yes, it is, because we want challenges. We want to find new things that are out there. And unfortunately, PowerShell is still being used as a common dropper and a technique that we use today. But we're not here to talk about PowerShell for Windows. We're going to talk about Linux, right? So why are we talking about PowerShell for Linux? So what's cool about PowerShell for Linux is that when Windows was deciding to open a lot of where Microsoft was starting to open a lot of their stuff out to the public, they wanted to actually release PowerShell to be a cross-platform scripting language that could be used for anybody. So in 2006, that's when they decided to release it for all Linux operating systems. The first operating systems that actually had it were Ubuntu, CentOS, and Red Hat systems at the time. So how did I get into getting into this stuff, right? So when I was working as a SOC analyst in the private sector, we would have a box that we would just do all of our dirty testing on. And on that box, the guys would run Kali Linux on it. And I was like, wait, why are we running Kali Linux to detonate malware on it? That doesn't make sense. And it's like, well, there's different tools that we want to try. There's different techniques that we want to do. So I got stuck with this malware campaign that I was always doing research on called Emotet. Anybody familiar with Emotet by a show of hands? Some of you? Okay, good. So Emotet is an annoying campaign. It's probably still around to this day. It doesn't go away. But a lot of Emotet would do back in 2017 to 2020 was they would always drop some type of macro document, and it would have some type of PowerShell dropper in it. And PowerShell would be used to basically infect the system by putting another dropper on there or an executable in place, right? So when it got to the point where we were trying to detonate the malware on the system and try to get PowerShell to actually give us the code itself, we would always break our boxes on the Windows side, but on Linux, it didn't. So Linux, I was able to get the callbacks, I was able to get the IOC indicators for it, and I would take those IOC indicators, I would then write rules for it for our team, and we would block the malware from there. So when it got time to use it for Kali, my team lead was like, hey, PowerShell works for Linux. You should actually find a way to get it installed on there. I was like, you know what? Challenge accepted. I'll go ahead and try it out. So that's how I got into it. I started looking into PowerShell for Linux, trying to learn how to get into that. I found a bug into it where if you tried to install PowerShell on Kali Linux, there's a specific library that was needed, and that was an old dependency for a lot of other main programs. So if you installed it, Mmap would be removed, Metasploit Framework would be removed, all of the big main tools it used, it would just wipe it. So I was like, oh crap, this isn't good. So I talked to Microsoft about it, and I reported the bug to them about it, and they were like, this is not an issue, this is not a problem, talk to the Kali team about it. I'm like, okay, I'm going to go talk to the Kali team about it. Kali team's like, this is not our support, this is not our problem, we're not doing this. I'm like, well, who's going to fix it then? So I kept trying to find ways to fix it, right? So I found different libraries that actually supported it, that made the changes into it, worked with Microsoft to get the changes in and get it patched. And we got it patched. So just a little accident is where I started digging more into this, because There's some really cool stuff in PowerShell for Linux and different commands and different operations. And I'll get into a little bit more about that later when we talk about the capabilities. So then from there, in 2018, when I found that bug, 2019, I worked with the Kali Linux team afterwards and said, hey, what can we do about getting PowerShell installed by default? So any different Kali Linux operating system that you use, you build, PowerShell is automatically installed by default. Took us a year to do that. And then the trend kept moving forward. So Ubuntu now, if anybody wants to download Ubuntu server, in their setup and installation, you can actually add PowerShell as an add-in option, and it'll install PowerShell for you on the fly. So, moving on to the capabilities with PowerShell for Linux. Why use it, right? Well, think of it. Cross-platform compatibility is one of the big things, right? Any type of scripts, any tools that you write, any modules that you want to install, you can actually do that. Now, there are some modules that won't work, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. The next thing I want to talk about is cloud platform integration, right? PowerShell works very well with Azure and different Azure modules and commandlets that you can use. You can actually use the AZ and Azure AD module, right, if you want to interact with your Azure environments that are in place, which is cool. Flexible scripting language. Ever wanted to write Bash and .NET and PowerShell at the same time and have it all run together? Yeah, I could do that. It's super cool. So, and then also just going back to like the libraries and modules, they're easy to install, they're easy to import. If there's any type of tools or techniques that you wanted to try, you can go ahead and do that with it. So, getting into that, why are we actually talking about PowerShell still? I don't get it. Some of us, I know we don't get it still. But some people also say PowerShell is dead. Yeah, it's not. PowerShell is still being trending in our world today. So to give you guys some examples, right? Ukraine military, right? Recently, it was on February 1st, 2024, a security operations team actually found that Russia was using a malware campaign called Skunkworm. And Skunkworm was an actual dropper that they packaged in, and that dropper would drop PowerShell onto the systems as their first initial web request that went through. The big Screen Connect Wise vulnerability that's on SentinelOne. Anybody seen that or had to deal with that last year? Yeah, that was a mess. An absolute mess that a lot of us had to go through and deal with. So some malware campaigns actually were abusing the Screen Connect Wise vulnerability, and all they had to do was write a simple PowerShell one-liner. That PowerShell one-liner went through. AV and EDR defenses that were being used for Screen Connect said, oh, this looks legit. We're going to go ahead and run it anyway. And that's how they got their malware campaign onto there. It's pretty crazy on how that goes in. And then for some people on the blue team side, they're like, but wait, hold on. We have ANSI. We're okay, right? ANSI's going to stop this, no problem. No. So OffSec actually, Victor here actually just released the article 2 weeks ago. I don't know if anybody's seen it or read it. But what this article talks about is it talks about an actual bypass that he found where you don't have to go through the virtual protect or API like syscall functions. And also bypasses memory protections that are in place. All you have to do is just pad and stuff into the ANSI DLL buffer, and from there you can get any code just to pass through and escape into it. So ANSI doesn't even do any of the checking. It just says, oh, hey, this looks legit, and we'll go ahead and run it. So those are just some examples I'm going to give you guys about PowerShell. Yes, it's still running in our environments today. It is still being used. Threat actors are still using this on a constant basis. So what known threat actors still use it to this day? Well, there's a whole list about them. BC Security posted this several months ago, and I still use it to this day as an actual example as to why we still see these threat actors are going out and using PowerShell in this way. MITRE ATT&CK, right? They always post some type of framework or article that talks about the top 5, known techniques that are out there that are causing a lot of problems. Where's PowerShell on that list, guys? Number 1. Number 1. It's awful. So we have that still being used till this day of where it's at. So now that I've given you guys a perspective about how PowerShell works, why do we still talk about PowerShell? All right. Now we're going to start getting into the Linux side of PowerShell, right? So recently, a lot of my testing that I've been doing lately has actually been not on Windows, not in Windows Active Directory environments. A lot of corporations are now starting to move away from actually building out their Windows server infrastructures and actually are starting to move into more of a Active Directory management server or service with, for instance, Red Hat Satellite and FreeIPA. And so when these companies are using that, they're looking at other tools that they can use like PowerShell for actual script and automation. Other scenarios I've seen has been hybrid environments where you still have your Windows and you have your Linux stuff, right? And they're all contained on one Active Directory environment that's being used. PowerShell, we can actually go ahead and interact with a lot of that stuff that's there. So, getting into that, right? So, what are the benefits from a pen tester's perspective of using PowerShell for Linux? Well, benefits is there's no AMSI. That's the nicest thing ever. No AMSI for security. Remote administration tools, we can use PS sessions to actually interact with Windows systems and Linux systems if PowerShell is actually enabled, and I'll show you guys how that works. There's limited logging capabilities also on Linux. So PowerShell for Windows, right, you can have event viewer, you can have tracks, you can have different IDs, right, to log everything. The only way really to be able to do any type of logging on PowerShell for Linux is by looking at var log messages if you have the audit D logs or the configurations all set up from there. It's kind of scary on how that all plays out. Limitations that we got, though, there's some unsupported commandlets, right? I talked about it earlier. If there's specific tools that you guys want to use or different PowerShell modules that are in place, you might not be able to get them to work. There's some scripts out in the real world still to this day that might not work with the Linux side, so you may have to have a Windows system, right? Ability to use sudo. Yeah, this is the one that stinks. It's like, I want to get root access, can't get root access with it. It's only limited to it. The only way you can is if you run PowerShell with sudo capabilities. That's the only way you can get full root access to the entire system. But most of the time when you're SSHing into a system or you have a subsystem set up in PowerShell, it's usually contained in the environment, but you can still interact with that user's environment or their workspace that's there. That's pretty much it, what you can do with it. So let's go ahead and get into some scenarios. So now we're going to actually look at some that we have here. So talking about initial access, right? So a couple organizations that I've seen will have a subsystem set up for PowerShell on it. So this is an example right here. With SSH remoting. So instead of you going ahead and SSHing into the system and getting a regular Linux shell, you can actually get a PowerShell prompt that shows up in their environments. So in order to do that, what you're going to have to do is a couple things, right? On the target system that you're using, or let's say your Linux box that you got, you then have to enable pub key authentication, password authentication, and then you also have to add the subsystem path of where PowerShell is. So on Ubuntu systems, you actually have to go into the snap package path to go ahead and point where PowerShell is to go ahead and run it in the subsystem. Or if you install PowerShell anywhere else by source, you just add that path. Once we go ahead and we add that path, and we go ahead and restart the SSH service, then we can actually interact with the session itself. This is where the fun stuff comes in. So if you guys are looking at this a little bit confused or like, how does this all work, right? What we're doing here is we're creating a new PSS session. We are going to our target system, and then we're giving a username for it. So think of it just like how you would log into, a Windows system through PowerShell. You're doing the same thing. But what's really cool with the authentication is there's 3 different ways. We can authenticate with a basic input. We can negotiate with the system. And my favorite out of all is you can actually authenticate with Kerberos tickets. Yeah. So some Linux systems, right, love to use the SSSD service or the configuration file, right? So we can take a user's Kerberos tickets that are saved there on the system, grab those tickets, and we can log in just like that and get an actual PSS session from there. So once we create the new PSS session, we can enter it, log into it, and we can run bash, .NET, PowerShell commands. We could do whatever we want in this little subsystem. It's crazy. So that's the one cool thing about it. The second thing we can also do is if we don't want to interact with the session, right? We don't want to have any type of OPSEC, go off, right? Or any type of event IDs. We can actually go ahead and invoke commands to it. Anyone ever play with a tool called EvilWinRM? Okay, so that's a few of you, right? So like in EvilWinRM, right? You don't really get an actual full session. In EvilWinRM, you are able to pull scripts from your system, right? And be able to run them or import them into it, right? So it runs in that session itself. It doesn't run on the actual disk or on the system for you. So with using the PS session, all I can do is invoke a command, put a script block in, or import a module, and it'll run it on the system for me without touching disk. How many guys are like, wait, is this real? Are you guys like scared about this? This is cool stuff. It's scary, but it's cool stuff. All right, so now that we got ourselves access to a target, right? Let's say we find credentials. We can actually do pass the hash if we want. Like I said, get a Kerberos ticket, right? What are some things we are going to look in this PowerShell prompt, right? Well, a lot of DevOps, sys engineers, or sysadmins love to create custom variables, and some of them will actually hard code them in their session. So we can use a commandlet called get variable. And what get variable does, it'll list all the different variables that someone, or basically what PowerShell has in place, right, so that we can automate things. Or for users, right, they create their own. So what I did was I actually wrote a little PowerShell script here. And in this PowerShell script, what it does is it parses through all the system functions that are already on the system, and it goes ahead and just gives me a list of what user functions are actually there. So I don't know if anybody you guys can see the screenshot a little bit. It looks a little small on my end here, but so what we're basically doing is we're parsing through all of the system commandlets that are there, getting through the variables onto it. And once we go ahead and do get local user variable, right, we see that there is a local user variable called credentials. So once we go ahead and we check out what credentials is, we can then go ahead and see that there is a credential for administrator, and it's under secure string. So what does that mean? Well, that string right there is a variable that we could probably parse. And we could probably extract that to get user credentials on there. So what's really cool about just using this function here, right, is I can get other variables. So any user variables that I created, I can see all that being parsed, which is cool. I mean, cool for a pentester hacker side. I don't know about the blue team side. I'm sorry about that. But anyways, going to my point where I was going to next, right? So now that we've gone through scenario 2, we know that there are credentials that are there. Let's go ahead and see if we can actually extract those, right? So this is where it gets even more funnier, right? How many of you guys use Microsoft's Windows credentials module? All right, so you guys use it on Windows. So Windows, when you're saving credentials on a Windows system, it actually encrypts it. It encrypts it in an AES string, in a format. On Linux, it does not. It encodes any of your strings in hex. Yeah, I don't know why Microsoft did this. I said the same thing when I posted this about it. Microsoft's like, it's a feature. We're not going to make any changes to it. Like, okay, fair enough. I got that response too many times. So how do we extract the credential? This is what we do. We go ahead on the user's PSS session. We can go ahead and call out the variable, and we can use a commandlet called export CLI XML. And what that's going to do is it's going to go ahead and actually grab the XML data that's saved from that credential, parse the credential for us, and we can actually see it right there. So in here, now you see the XML data that's being dumped, you see the username, and you see the password, right? And the password is encoded in hex. So how do we decode it? Well, PowerShell's got tools, right, to decode stuff from base 64, base 10, hex, right? So we can write something just like this. We can write a commandlet called hex password, right? We put our hex string that's in there. And then from there, we go ahead and we split the hex password. We convert it to ASCII for us, right, to give us the characters. And that's the password we get. So we get password summer 2024 exclamation point. That's a great password. Gotta love it being there. So now that I've shown you guys 3 little scenarios on how this works, right? Now I'm going to show you something really cool where we can automate all that stuff. So it's going to be a demo time, so please pray the demo gods for this one. I hope this all works. So I'm going to introduce you guys to a new tool called Catalyst. And now what Catalyst is it's a Linux prowess script that you can use on PowerShell for Linux. It's already focusing on the commandlets that are in .NET Core, and the reason why I wrote it is, you can see it there, I just wrote it for fun. I was like, I want to figure out what commandlets can I use and what commandlets I can't use for PowerShell. And since I work with a lot of systems that have PowerShell for Linux on there, I got tired of trying to parse everything, go through command by command by command. And to show you guys how it works, it's really straightforward and simple. So I'm going to go ahead and exit out of the PowerPoint here real quick. And we're going to go ahead and look at some code. Can everybody see that? Huh? No. Not yet? Okay. Did the HDMI die? Oh, great. Technical difficulties. See, this is why we pray to demo gods. Okay. And Okay, so there's my screen. I guess I have to drag it over. Okay. Oh, this is going to be so weird. I got to do it through here. Okay, where's the full screen? Oh, perfect. Actually, yeah, that works. I can see it there. Thanks, man. All right, so everybody can kind of see this, right? All right, so this is Catalyst, and it's a cool PowerShell script I wrote for all the stuff I've done on assessments, where I've just automated everything and put it into one section here. So right here, starting from line 334 and going all the way down, we have functions that are already built in. So anybody, actually, I'll get a show of hands real quick. How many of you guys use Linux prowess scripts on your assessments, like linpeas or linenum? By showing hands, I'm just curious. Okay, so think of it like this, but in PowerShell, just for Linux systems. That's all it is. So what we have is we have functions already written where we can get the host operating system information. We can check to see if a Linux system is actually joined to a domain, right? What is it using to do it? Is it using Centrify? Is it using Realm? We have checks already in place for that, which is pretty cool. Also have ways to check for processes, getting list of drives, right? Is the system, what does the system have for local drives? Is it connected to any network drives, any shares? We can get that. Network activity, check for login users. I like this one. This one's my fun one. Check for any type of antivirus installed, even though most of the time most Linux systems don't have AV installed. Check to see if Credential Manager is installed, any other PowerShell modules we have here. This function here will go ahead and hunt for any type of credentials, any PowerShell scripts, AWS credentials, Azure credentials that are on the Linux target system. PowerShell user history, this is pretty interesting that I found. Depending on what Linux operating system you use, PowerShell will have its own file saved for any type of commands that you run in that history. But I've seen on other Linux systems, it'll pull not just the PowerShell user history, it will also pull the Linux user's history as well too. So you get it all at once. Just pretty neat. And then a function just to check for useful programs on the target. So this is just a basic, simple prowess script. I didn't add anything else to it. I kind of kept the checks to be the same. But there's some other stuff I've added in there too that you guys are going to see in a little bit. But what's really nice about PowerShell, right, is we can write these functions, we can write all these checks, and all I have to do is if I want to make a change where if I'm on an assessment or a program, right, and I want to just go ahead and search for PS1 files, all I do is just uncomment the little pound sign here. That module is going to go ahead and run. Makes it easy, said and done. So going back up, scrolling up here, this is where all the back-end meat comes in. It's a lot that I put into this, but I think it'll be fun for everybody to use. So all you basically have to do, right, if you're on a target system or you want to run this locally yourself, we're going to go ahead and run it here. I wanted to run this on a target system, but for some reason I'm having some commandlet like module issues with WSMan on the Ubuntu side, so I'm going to get that fixed later. But just to give you guys an idea of how quick and easy this is, and we're done. So we scroll up, and we'll go ahead and just do a quick breakdown of the data. So start here. You can remove the banner. It's easy to get rid of. We check the PowerShell version that's on the target, what it's running. We check what type of operating system kernel information is all here. Gives the nice breakdown of that. Checking to see if the system's joined Active Directory, right? Tells us it's not joined the Active Directory. Gathering current process list. I didn't have that commented out. Local network drives, that comments out. There goes ahead and shows us the list of the different drives, right? The provider for it, right? How much is used, how much is free in the disk space that we need. Grabbing current network connections, this was fun. Right now there's only just this one, but if there's any other concurrent connections, we can see that. Routing information already pulls that out, puts it in a nice table for us to see as we parse that. Currently logged in users, antivirus that's on the software, credential manager tools are installed on the system, that's a plus. And then tools that are installed on the system here. So that's pretty quick, just to get all that data. So the only thing that is not included, like PowerShell-wise, like everything is running in this script either on PowerShell or .NET Core. The only module that is not running in that, and I can go ahead and show you guys here real quick, is this function here called Get Network Activity. The only reason why Get Network Activity is using SSSTAC NTLP, right? You could change it to netstat, NAO, or NATP if you want, whatever you want to do. You can add the Linux commands for it, right? The only reason why we can't, in PowerShell, there's no module that can actually pull the network connection stuff is because there are certain Windows commandlets that are needed to run it that are not compatible with Linux right now. So hopefully that'll change in the future. So some of you guys on Windows, if you guys use the getNet TCP connection function, right, that gives you all that status and data, that's the function that they're looking to implement soon in the future. I don't know when yet, but once it does, I hope to make some changes to the script for that. So that builds and parses all that data out that we see here. So, but going back to the script here real quick and the rest of the output, that's pretty much it. That's how this tool works. So if anybody wants to be able to play with this tool, check it out. If you guys have any feedback, suggestions, what else should be added, features, you guys want to write something for it, I'm more than happy to talk more about it on GitHub. The code is all on GitHub for anybody that wants to access it. Check it out from there. But other than that, let me go ahead and go back to the PowerPoint here. Current slide? There we go, perfect. But other than that, that's pretty much it for my talk. I hope you guys enjoy this, but does anybody have any questions or things they want to talk about? No questions. It's pretty straightforward, I guess. Awesome. Well, thank you guys for coming to my talk. I really do appreciate it, and I hope you guys enjoy the rest of BSides Buffalo today. Thank you, guys.